In this video, I'll be taking a look at several countries that exist today when they were at their greatest extent territory-wise, as well as showing a more realistic greater version of these countries that could have existed till this day. The policy of, or movement to, expand a country in a similar way to what I'll be showing in this video is referred to as irredentism, and has been the cause of many conflicts and referendums throughout history. If you haven't watched my first video on irredentism, please click the link in the description and check it out. In that video, I also provide a slightly more thorough explanation of what irredentism is, but it is by no means necessary to watch the first video before this one. First off, we'll take a look at the United Kingdom. The British Empire is perhaps one of the most well-known empires, as it is a fairly recent one, as well as the largest one to ever exist, controlling over a quarter of the world in 1920 at its height. The places it controlled includes the British Isles, Canada, a large portion of Africa and the Middle East, as well as India, Australia, and much more. If we also include all territory that has ever been under British rule or occupation, including their predecessor England, we get this. In addition to the already world-spanning empire, it also has notable places such as the eastern United States, their German occupation zone following World War II, as well as a solid chunk of France, which England controlled during the height of the 100 Years' War. Britain keeping their empire, though, is overly optimistic in my opinion, assuming the age of imperialism ends like in our world. But even with the fall of their empire, there are ways the UK could have been larger today, and to me, the most realistic way Britain could be larger is if it kept Ireland. There are several ways the United Kingdom could have kept Ireland, but when researching this I see two major ones that could have directly led to more unity within the British Isles and less of a separatist movement in Ireland. The first one is the UK remaining Catholic. One of the biggest factors that led to the Irish developing a very separate identity from their English, Scottish, and Northern Irish cousins is that they remained mostly Catholic, while the rest cut ties with the Pope. If this hadn't happened, it doesn't seem too crazy to think that the Irish might not have developed as distinct an identity and could have remained in the UK. The second one is if the UK managed to satisfy the Irish, maybe by successfully granting them home rule before the onset of World War I, making them a more equal member of the kingdom, with their own parliament, much like Scotland. In our timeline, Ireland was due to obtain home rule by 1916, but this was suspended because of World War I. If perhaps Ireland was granted home rule earlier than was planned, it is conceivable that there would be less of an Irish independence movement, but it is important to mention that none of this is set in stone, and we can never know for sure. Regardless, a greater UK that could have existed till this day would likely be one including Ireland. Now I'm well aware of all the Irish patriots screaming their Celtic war cries, so let's try to avoid an all-out war in the comments and give Ireland the spotlight for a minute. Ireland has for much of its history been under the British and English, and before that they were a patchwork of multiple local Irish rulers. That means we can't really show an Ireland at its territorial height, because it is really already at its height. But I still think taking a moment to talk about the Celtic peoples as a whole is very relevant. The Celts, before the migration of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes from Germany and Denmark, were the largest ethnic and linguistic group in the British Isles, not just living in Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, but also England. And going further back, before Germanic migration into the Roman Empire, and before France or Gaul became more Latin-speaking, the Celtic people lived in and ruled much of Western and Central Europe. Of course not as a coherent Celtic empire or anything, but as many tribes and local rulers with an overarching common cultural heritage and related languages. But not diverging too much from our own timeline, I think a greater irredentist Ireland would simply be this: an Irish republic that also has Northern Ireland. This could potentially have happened if the Irish potato famine never happened. Before the famine, the Irish population was at over 8 million, which at the time was 60% as large as the population of England. And just looking at their geographical size, that does make a lot of sense. It's not like England is huge in comparison. But despite that, the Irish famine devastated the population, and England surged ahead. Today, the island of Ireland only has a little under 12% the population of England. A larger Irish population would also mean that the Protestant immigrants from Scotland and England would likely remain a minority in the north, thus resulting in the north leaving with the rest of Ireland. It's also very possible that the Gaelic Irish language would survive to a greater extent. Maybe Ireland would be much more bilingual, with many more still speaking Gaelic Irish at home. Today I think this Irish nation would not only be slightly larger, but also have a significantly higher population. I doubt it would keep up with England's growth, as it does have less fertile land, but it could level out at a solid 10 or 12 million by today, significantly more than the 6.6 million living on the island in our timeline. Now, we'll take a quick look at Mexico. Mexico at its territorial height right after independence from Spain was a lot larger than today. In addition to what we today call Mexico, it also controlled Central America and the southwestern United States. Now, looking at how much bigger Mexico used to be, is it possible that Mexico could have kept at least some of this territory till this day? Well, Mexico is a nation that has throughout its history been plagued by internal issues and separatism, and in the mid-1800s it faced immigration from the southern United States into Texas, followed by a war of independence and eventual war with the US. But could any of this have been avoided in a more realistic irredentist Mexican scenario? Perhaps, but in my opinion there is no way Mexico could keep all of its lands. So a realistic Greater Mexico, in my opinion, would look something like this. Mexico would essentially have to be more stable in its early history and keep Central America under control. It would face some internal issues no matter what, and some of Central America might still declare independence, only to rejoin later, much like the Yucatan in our timeline. It is also possible for Mexico to keep slightly more territory to the north. For one, it could have refused the Gadsden Purchase. It could also potentially have gotten a better deal in the Mexican-American War, with the combination of a more conservative United States, as well as a more stable Mexico, which could potentially put up more of a fight in the Mexican-American War. I don't think the war could have been avoided, however, and the US would be more than capable of enforcing Texas's claims and taking most of Mexico's northern provinces. So a realistic Greater Mexico would only keep slightly more of what we call the southwestern US. Since I looked at the Vatican last episode, I think it could be fun to make it a tradition to look at small countries at the end of these videos. So with that said, let's then take a look at Luxembourg. Luxembourg today is less than half the size it used to be. It has lost lands to all of its three neighbors of Belgium, Germany and France. So a Greater Luxembourg today, in my opinion, would be one that simply kept the Belgian province of Luxembourg. It could have happened as a result of an alternate Treaty of London in 1839, where it would simply be agreed upon that Luxembourg would keep those lands and Belgium would end up slightly smaller. It wouldn't make Luxembourg a big European player or anything, but it might not be overlooked as much internationally, as it would be twice as big area-wise and have a more notable population that's just shy of 900,000 people. That's all for now. Hope this quick look at a few irredentist scenarios was interesting. If there's anything you would like to share, feel free to leave a comment. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button if you want to see more content like this in the future. See you around.